Hi, this is Boki, and today I'm going to be doing my second recent romance reading rundown. I don't know why I thought alliteration was going to be the key to this, but I don't know. I think I'm easily swayed by repeated letters. So I'm not going to have as many books to talk about in this video as I did the last time, but I did want to go through them. Some of them I talked about in my November wrap-up, so I'm going to give some more details about them and talk a little bit more in depth about what I liked and didn't like about them. So yeah, so starting off is Private Arrangements by Sherry Thomas. This is a Victorian era historical romance, and it's basically it's a mending broken relationship kind of romance where our hero and our heroine, they're actually married at the beginning of the novel, and you find out that the heroine engaged in some shady shit to actually make the wedding happen. And the hero, he found about that pretty much right before the wedding, and as soon as their wedding is over, he runs off to America and it's just like, he runs off and he's just like, I don't want anything to do with you. The novel alternates between the past where they are courting each other and falling in love with each other, like legitimately falling in love, until the heartbreak of their marriage happens and like the revelations that kind of drive that. And it alternates from that to like the current day situation, which is the heroine saying like, I would like to move on from this marriage, please give me a divorce. And so there's a lot of tension about this divorce and about the events that happened. And I really like the characters. I thought the hero in particular, it was not a character that I've read a lot, where she's very manipulative. She is very much just making shit happen for her own benefit, but she does also love the hero and he does love her, and so you're like waiting for them to kind of just work it out and get it together. But while I did like the characters, this book was overall kind of just like meh for me. I thought it was okay. I would recommend it if you're looking for like a Victorian mending broken relationships kind of book, but for some reason I just wasn't that crazy invested overall. The second book is A Promise of Fire by Amanda Bouchet, and this is a fantasy romance. The world of the story involves like Greco-Roman gods who have clearly picked their favorites. Oh my god, he's really at it. He like does this thing to scratch his chin like this. Sorry. Anyway, sorry if he's being distracting. There are these Greco-Roman gods, they are picking their favorites, doing their usual meddlesome thing, but it's really set around the protagonist, the heroine, who is a kingmaker. She is able to discern truth from lies when you speak to her, and she also has a number of other gifts. And she has been living in hiding. She has been deeply traumatized by her youth, where her gifts were really sought after, and she's basically been looking after herself for a long period of time. Of course, hero comes in. He is like this warlord who is helping to put his sister on the throne, and he is like, hey, a kingmaker, that sounds good, and kidnaps her. And her kind of ensuing association with him and his group and the men around him is like a ton of fun to read. There's a lot of that tension there because, you know, he's kidnapped her, but she also likes him for very legitimate reasons. She respects his judgment in a lot of things. She respects his character, but she is also deeply traumatized by things from her past, and so is also constantly holding him at bay. So there's a lot of tension there. So I think there's a lot of things about this book that are really good. There's a lot of Games of Thrones-y kind of conflict between different kingdoms and stuff. So if you like that, you will probably like this book. I think if you like any fantasy that's based on Greek gods, then this book might be for you. I mean, there's Poseidon helping her out a lot of the time. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in the world there. But this book was also just kind of like okay for me. I liked it, but I wasn't super psyched on it. I thought the writing was really frustrating. It's told in first person narration. She does a lot of that kind of like literally it will just say "ga," like that's her just like enunciating "ga" to herself, and that's fine if it happens, or that's fine if that happens. Like, obviously we all like do that. Like, I do that. I message people all the time. I'm just like, ugh. But there's a difference between that happening like when you're texting someone and like when you're telling a story in first person narration. It just kind of comes off as like weirdly flip, I guess. I don't know. I just find that kind of thing frustrating. It just feels like that, like the comic Kathy where she just says ack all the time. It just like goes, it takes you out of the story, especially one where like it's set in like this weird fantasy world that feels kind of ancient, to hear them just saying like ga, ga all the time, like, I don't know, it felt kind of weird. The ending of the book was also really abrupt, and to the point where I was like, well, I don't really know if I want to read the next book. It just ended, and there's like revelations that you know are coming, but they don't, and it's just, I wasn't a fan of how it ended. So like I said in my November wrap up, like I got this ebook on sale for like $1.99 or something on Amazon. If the sequel is not out yet, but if it does go on sale as well, maybe I'll read it, but it's not something that I'm actively seeking out. The next book is Forbidden by Beverly Jenkins, who is a romance writer who I've been meaning to read, because he writes a lot of romances centered around Black characters, which is not something that I've read enough of. I think maybe Alyssa Cole is the only other Black romance writer that I've really read, and her story from, I think it was Radio Silence, is maybe one of the only romances I've read with a Black heroine. So Forbidden takes place in the West. It tells the story of Eddie, who is basically going to California to start her own business, but gets robbed along the way and ends up stranded in this desert town. She's rescued by Ryan Fontaine, a wealthy saloon owner who takes her in. And Ryan is someone who she thinks is white, but who is actually Black and has been passing as white for some time. And that ends up posing a lot of challenges, because he is passing as white really for the sake that he sees for the Black community. His goal is to pretend to be a white man so that he can obtain the power he needs to engage politically in ways that will enable him to help the Black community around him. And he, for example, he owns a saloon, and he is one of the only saloons that will allow Black people in there, which of course drives all the white people out because they're super racist and shit. Yeah, there are tensions then that come about, because, you know, there's what he originally intended when he decided to pass as a white man, versus what actually ends up becoming the reality when he realizes that he can't necessarily be with the woman that he loves as a white man, as well as some other things that come into play throughout the book. This is definitely a story that I have not read before, and it presented a lot of ideas that I have not really encountered before, so I really, really enjoyed it for that. For the romance itself, I thought this was a little bit low-key. I guess I like a certain degree more of hijinks kind of ensuing, but so it wasn't necessarily fun in the way that I like my romance novels to be, but I really like the story itself. So even though this isn't necessarily a book that I enjoyed a lot for the romance itself, like I didn't dislike it, it just didn't like hit the things that I like when I read romance novels. I did like the book overall, and I will probably seek out more Beverly Jenkins stories, because I think that she's telling a lot of different stories that are not often told and that are really worthwhile to read. The next series that I started reading was the Scoundrels series by Sarah MacLean, who, as I have mentioned, I am really falling in love with all of her books. So this series is also a Regency one, and basically it follows the stories of women who are scandals and the men who are scoundrels who fall in love with them. So the first one is The Rogue in the Dark, and this starts with the main heroine throwing her philandering brother-in-law into a fountain in front of an audience and basically being promised that her life will now be in ruins. She ends up stowing away in a particular scoundrel's carriage and ending up in your usual kind of hijinks ensue romance. And the next was A Scot in the Dark, where the heroine is been in love with this painter and has posed for a painting for him that is meant to be private, and then ends up realizing that he means to reveal it to the world. And so she is panicking because this guy that she loved and who she thought loved her has been clearly taken advantage of her. And she's actually the ward of a Scotsman who does not really want to be a duke, but has to be one, and who is reluctantly taking her on. And he is basically like, well, you've got the scandal going on, if we can get you married before the portrait goes out, you might be rescued. And then of course, over the course of that happening, they end up falling in love. I really like this series. I think it's, she mentions in her afterwards that they are heavily inspired by kind of our modern day TMZ scandal culture, which I love anything that's inspired by celebrity culture. And I think it's just Like, I think her books are always reliable if you're looking for something just kind of fun and lighthearted, but also well thought out with really distinct characters who have, you know, who really have things to work through without that being like an agonizing, torturous process. And the last, this is a series called Fly Me to the Moon by Emma Barry and Genevieve Turner. This series is a alternate, I guess, version of the space race. So it's not like NASA, it's the American Space Department, and it's not like Neil Armstrong, it's a bunch of other fictional astronauts, but it is so much fun. I have started becoming increasingly interested in historical romances that take place in settings or in time periods that are not commonly, you know, used. Like, I love Regency. I love that Sarah MacLean writes these great Regency novels, but I would also love to read more historical stories that are not set during Regency times. The space race is definitely not a common setting as far as I can tell, but oh my god, the series is so good. So, okay. The first book in the series is Stardust, and this tells the story of a divorcee who ends up moving to this town, to this neighborhood with her kids, and ends up living next door to an astronaut who is kind of a playboy, and over the course of the book, they become more neighborly and stuff. It's very sweet, and I think it gets at a lot of like cultural issues at the time regarding divorce and the adoration of astronauts. Like, there's just something really interesting about how well it builds out, you know, the different fragments of the culture that are kind of undergoing major shifts at that time, like the space race with the Soviets, and as well as like changing ideas of women and their family and whether or not it's okay to divorce your husband. So I found that really sweet. I found it really fun. I thought a major part of the story is not just the astronauts but their wives, and I thought the book did a really cool thing in bringing out the pressures that come with being the wife of an astronaut. These men who are being placed on a pedestal by everyone because, you know, they are the ones who are going to go to space first, hopefully. The next book, the second book that I read, there's more books in the series, but I've only read the first two so far. But the second book is Earthbound, and I love this book so much. So this is about two of the engineers who work at the American Space Department, and they are engaging in a secret tryst, basically, but that it's supposed to be completely separate from work and also completely separate from romance. And I have a hard time with fictional portrayals of scientists for reasons that I think are probably obvious. I think I tend to be a little bit unnecessarily nitpicky, but this is weirdly the most realistic portrayal of scientists in romance that I can imagine. And I don't know if I can explain this properly without it coming off as me generalizing, because okay, so I've read quite a few romances with scientist characters, and I think they try to play at the weird emotional distance that, you know, some of us may have from people around us, but they do it in ways that I don't feel are completely accurate. I think they play up a lot of the weird, like, jargony way that we tend to speak. Just come up as a caricature that talks in jargon and, like, doesn't know how to, like, communicate in a way that is remotely relatable, which, I don't know, maybe we do that. I only talk to scientists most of the time, so it's entirely possible that this is what we come off as. For some reason, the characters in Earthbound, even though they're both engineers, like, there's something about it that feels realistic, that it feels like they talk in a jargony way and in a detached way that actually feels like the way scientists talk. And like I said, I don't know if this is going to make sense. I don't know if it's going to be just like me generalizing the way scientists speak based on the ones that I've talked to. But these characters are emotionally detached in a way that, and it's not about being emotionally stupid. Like, they are aware of their emotionals and they are emotionally competent. They're just also like, they compartmentalize it in a way that I think makes sense. And I really enjoy this book. I loved it so much. I will probably reread this a lot. I think if you're looking for a unique setting for historical romances, you should look to the series Fly Me to the Moon. I think that is really great, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. That's my recent romance reads. If you have books that you want to recommend to me that you are curious about, definitely let me know. I'm looking for more romances all the time. I feel like the best way to find romance novels to read is just from other people's recommendations. So yeah, bye.